Next up on the broadcast, Representative Mary Moore of Birmingham is back in studio with us. Representative, welcome back to Capitol Journal.
Welcome back. Enjoy being here and the opportunity that you invited me.
It's our pleasure.
Yeah.
Representative, I want to start with critical race theory. It is a hot topic in Alabama and across the country right now. The state school board, for instance, is considering a resolution that would be a positioning statement, so to speak, on critical race theory that says that nothing would be taught in public schools that would put one race or one gender above the other. This critical race theory is not currently taught in our public schools,
Correct.
but there seems to be some moves designed to be preemptive strikes, so to speak, against this. Where do you stand on this?
First of all, I've seen no evidence or information to say that critical race theory from the perspective they are talking about will be taught. But history is history. And if you're going to look back at history, you can't wipe out what has already happened and say that we won't mention it. And I think that there's a lot of misinformation, and it's just a method of taking us off course, off task. We'll start something new. If one thing doesn't work, then we'll put that out. And what it does when you take issues like critical race theory or any other issue that would take us off task to look at the needs of this country and what we ought to be doing, then it hurts us. Because one thing that I've always believed is that this country has never lived up to its true potential because it's never dealt with its history. It's had a long, fruitful history. Then there's a history that was not so good. But let's deal with it all and learn from the past and what mistakes we made to prevent that. But the course that we've taken is not talk about it. And we cannot not talk about it forever. I just think that the people who have done the most to put critical race theory on the scene, they're doing it as diversion. And I don't think that it will be taught in our schools, not from the perspective that it's taught on a collegiate level.
Right.
And it's taught in those classes where it dictates that we delve down into every aspect of whatever subject that we're dealing with, not necessarily with history. It could be a topic dealing with sociology or psychology, or it could be a topic dealing with labor, critical theories. You could put race there. You could put critical theory for labor, critical theory for the economy of the country. That's all that it's about. And usually it's on a college level where those people majoring in those types of subjects will delve down into it. It's nothing that you will go in and teach an elementary school child. What you would teach an elementary school child, if it's history, if it's Alabama history, you delve into all the aspects of Alabama history. You don't go into why it happened when you're dealing with children of a young age. So when you deal with history, when you get to high school, you deal with history or whatever subject on that level. So when you're talking about the critical aspects of it, that's on a collegiate level, and it could be undergraduate. It goes more in depth on a graduate level. So I think that the people who have created this boogeyman and making these parents believe that this is something that's going to be taught in their classroom, well, the parents got to step back and think, well, did anybody teach me this? When I was in elementary school, high school, where did I even come across this philosophy?
You said that you think these people who are raising some of the concerns are doing so as a diversion.
A diversion.
What do you mean when you say that?
Well, there are so many other issues going on in this state right now. You got voting right issues that Congress is dealing with. You got the president dealing with the infrastructure. And when you get down to infrastructure, it's not just roads and bridges in the 21st century. Infrastructure in the 21st century could be the information highway. How do we upgrade all aspects of the country on a computer science and making sure they have that ability to use it? So it's just a diversion to keep us from talking about the issues we need to talk about. Like we're here today to talk about a prison reform. That's an issue we got to talk about. How do we prevent it? How do we deal with once a person is incarcerated? So there are so many more issues. Hunger, people who are homeless. In our school system, I'm amazed at the number of children that go to school every day and they're homeless. Some of them might be living in a shelter, but there are some also that's living on the streets. But they're getting up in whatever situation they're in, going to school. Those are issues we need to deal with. Mental illness in our schools. We need early detection. And that would help with the prison and the crime situation we're going through. So I think it's just a distraction to keep us from talking about this. You know, when the average person you talk to already understand that a child in K through 12 will not be exposed to critical race thinking.
How would you respond to the bills that have been pre-filed for next year? One deals with banning the teaching of critical race theory in schools, and the other would restrict it in throughout state government, not just in education.
Well, this is it. The people presenting those bills are just totally ignorant. They're ignorant. It's just like some of the voting rights bills that we introduced. Well, in Alabama, as long as I've worked the election, I've never been able to go into a polling place and bring a ballot out to a car for a person to cast a ballot. So why do we pass a bill for something we've never done in the first place? I've never seen a situation like they had in Texas where you could drive by and vote. They have a machine out there you to vote. So we've never had that. You know, why are we wasting our time on that when we still got to think about hunger? We got to think about unemployment. We got to think about what makes our education system better. What makes Alabama better? What makes it better? Poverty areas that's been in this state since the state been a state. How do we clear it up and make those people quality and quantity of life better? So I think that's pure ignorance. It's a stall on what you need to be dealing with. Let's deal with the things that the Alabama Constitution say we ought to come here and deal with.
You mentioned prison reform earlier. Let's talk about that for a minute or two. It's widely assumed that there might be a special legislative session to deal with our prison problems. Governor Ivey and legislative leaders have been meeting, talking about a new plan they want to put together to build new prisons. How do you feel about new prison construction?
I think that because of the age of some of our prisons, we need them. But because of what the federal government is charging us with, a new building will not get us out of the situation we're in. We're in a situation where we've got prison overcrowded. We've got a situation that because we're not in the correction business, and they used to say a correction institution, we're not correcting anything, it seems. So when these prisons serve their time, are released back into the population, because their actions have not been corrected, they haven't been given a new perspective on how to be a responsible citizens. I think those are the things that we need to do, and building a new building that's bigger and better, that would have more beds, does not solve that problem. What we've got to look at first is prison reform. We've got people that have been incarcerated that are people with mental illness. Mental ill people should not be in prison per se. We ought to have another institution where we deal with their illness. There's when you go beyond mental illness, a lot of people that are incarcerated, they didn't do well in school from a perspective that they had a learning disability. We need to correct that in the prison system. The system ought not to be that we house as many people as we can house. And lately there's been some conversation about the 13th Amendment. When you talk about the 13th Amendment giving us levels of freedom as black people, there's a section in there that allow for prisons unless they break the laws. So it seems as though it's been a design, if people look back historically, and I think History is very important in our actions today and in the future. When you look back historically, even after slavery, because there's so many blacks incarcerated, that was the new slavery. And I tell people, I always remember my grandmother, when we are originally from Elmore County. And when my granddad and his brothers would come back to Elmore County to do hunting during the hunting season, and my grandmama always said, be careful when you go through Columbiana, because if you get stopped, you could be in prison forever for a minor infraction.
Just because you're African American?
Yes. And you know, they've done enough documentaries on it. On a minor situation, for instance, like in Alabama codes, there once was a time where you had after 6 p.m. you couldn't walk on a railroad track eating goober beans. Well, suppose you got arrested for that. There have been people arrested historically in the state of Alabama for minor offenses where the fine might have been $5 or $10, but in that period of time you were incarcerated and you were allowed to work it off. And there's evidence in history to show that those people for a $5 fine could have been incarcerated for the rest of their lives.
And it's those kind of things you think we need to address through criminal justice reform in association with new prison construction.
That's right. And then I think if we're talking about prison reconstruction, we need to do it from a design where we have some facilities set aside for those people that have committed some type of crime, and they have mental illness, that we deal with their mental illness rather than putting them in prison like we do. If a person is a murderer, he's thrown in there with someone that's mentally ill, who's thrown in there with someone who might have been arrested for selling drugs, or someone that's been that committed some other misdemeanor, you know. But usually only people who get a chance to be separated from that are wealthy people. They go to the prison where it's just like they're at a resort. But these prisons that we're talking about, we've got to put in there some correction factor. It used to be you could go to prison when they said a correction institution, that people learned how to do woodworking or carpentry, or they learned how to do, some people became lawyers, some people got their college degrees. Well, for people who, with the training, different training programs we might have, once they're released from prison, I do think that there needs to be a relationship with the business community. So if I'm trained, and I could give this, one of the ministers in my church was incarcerated for a while. He learned how to do carpentry, does beautiful work. But when he got out of prison, at his time, they had him set up where there was someone to hire him. Never took a step back. Now he does ministry in prisons. He tried it, and not only that, for young people that get out that he tried to teach them what he learned.
And you think we need more of that?
We need more of that. Lot more of that. Why not make these people taxpayers? They've already been incarcerated on taxpayers' money. So let's make them productive citizens and become taxpayers, become productive citizens in the community.
Indeed.
Where they can help prevent this by doing mentoring programs with our young people, which are a lot of men that have, and women, we don't talk much about women that have been incarcerated. Those that learn something, that was not the path I should have been on. This is a better path. And my incarceration has helped me even get more focused on what my calling, or like some people would, from a religious perspective, we say, our charge to keep. And sometimes that's what it takes, because we look at Paul. Paul was in prison, but you know, in there he still did his ministry, and outside he did his ministry to help somebody else get on a better path. And I think that's what we ought to be about.
Representative Mary Moore of Birmingham. It's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming.
Appreciate it. Anytime. Anytime.